Now, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to start session 3. Theme for session 3 is decarbonization throughout the LNG value chain. The moderator for session 3 is Mr. Michael Stoppard, Chief Strategist, Global Gas Energy Research and Analysis, IHS Market. The presentation will be done by Mr. John T. Shepard, the BP Trading and Shipping, and Mr. Lucian Pagliaresi, the President of EPRINC, and Mr. Jean-François Gauthier, the GHGSat, and Mr. Frédéric Barnaud from Pavilion Energy. And from Tokyo Gas, we have Mr. Takeuchi Atsunori. And from Woodside, Japan, we have Mr. George Gilboy, who is our chief representative. Please look forward to the keyword at the session. Now, Mr. Stoppard, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Stoppard, and I am Chief Strategist for Global Gas with IHS Market. And it really is my very great pleasure and privilege to have been invited to introduce and moderate this important session. I'd like to start, if I may, by thanking our hosts, METI, for the efforts they have gone to keep this event going and to place it on a virtual setting. At this time, when we have limited travel opportunities, it really is more important than ever to keep alive and to keep going the channels of communication and dialogue. Now, our topic for this session is decarbonization through the LNG value chain. And our hosts have set us a challenge by placing the emphasis on action, specifically actions towards an ideal LNG market. Some people would suggest that we face a trade-off between tackling climate change and driving economic growth and recovery. There are others who would say that the current crisis is actually an opportunity to give us a new opportunity to move forward both economically and environmentally on a new sustainable basis. After all, we are seeing fiscal stimulus packages from governments incorporating a strong commitment to green growth and a green economy. To use an expression that we have in English, build back better. Now, I am based in Europe, and I submit to everybody today that the crisis that we're going through has not derailed the focus on decarbonization. On the contrary, European governments are committing to long-term decarbonization goals and putting forward a variety of hydrogen roadmaps. This is not confined to governments. We are seeing industry and companies developing new sustainability metrics which run alongside the traditional financial metrics. So on this panel, we will discuss what the industry is already doing today and what it is planning to do to increase the effort for the future. So the plan is we will ask each of our 6 panelists today to give some opening remarks that will take approximately the first half of the session, and then we will move into discussion and into the Q&A session. And then we have a little innovation that we will experiment with at the end of the session. So I'll keep you waiting to see what that is all about. Well, let us get started. And to begin, I'm going to turn to Mr. Frédéric Barnaud. Mr. Frédéric Barnaud, Group CEO of Pavilion Energy. Hello, Frédéric, welcome. I think we'd like to hear more about Pavilion Energy's clean energy initiatives, But in particular, we've been reading reports about conditions on your LNG procurement and that you're asking suppliers about CO2 emissions. That sounds very interesting. Perhaps you can share some more with the audience. Thank you, Frederick.
Good afternoon, Michael. Good afternoon to all. Thank you to Meti for organizing this and inviting us to speak on that matter. Obviously, the past few months have been extremely difficult for all of us, either our families as well as our businesses and economies. But I think we are emerging very strong with the determination of an accelerated path towards decarbonization strategies, what we call deep decarbonization, as well as reaching, as was highlighted yesterday at the UN, carbon peak as soon as possible. In our role at Pavilion Energy, apart from being a global participant to the LNG and gas markets, we are deeply committed towards supplying strategic energy towards Singapore market, our home market. And the primary energy for feeding Singapore markets and industries is the natural gas. And that will remain for the foreseeable future while we develop alternative technologies and processes. Therefore, we could not contemplate the supply of our activities here for the next 10 years without a sustainability angle. The compromise we have found, because as you said, it's also a matter of compromise between accessing technologies, prices, and finding the right solutions, pragmatic ones. The compromise we find was to sort of listen to the buzz of the market that was experimenting on spot carbon neutral LNG cargoes and try to take it to the next stage. So the stage we've decided is to include that as part of our LNG supply tender. Not simply by just asking carbon neutral to come into the pool, the supply pool, but really to go to the basics of setting up methodologies to measure GHG emissions on the chain, on the supply chain. And that is not an easy task because you have to combine, obviously, reserves, production, liquefaction, shipping, and all those segments who have their own, I guess, industry working groups, their own philosophy. Sometimes it's not always clear how it will become regulated, but aggregate all that and effectively try to end up in Singapore with the delivery of each LNG cargo to us with ultimately going for simplicity. So the simplicity is to have a statement of GHG emission, like we have other trade documents, certificate of quality, for example, and that statement would aggregate the carbon history, I would say, of the cargo being delivered to us. Complex, and that requires a lot of work across the industry, primarily with the supplier that's going to participate with us. So it's finding good compromise on LNG price, but also on the willingness to promote those methodologies so that we can end up pragmatically with those statements. And then on our side, with the supplier or with other participants in the decarbonization chains, is works on offsets and works on market-based or regulated-based tax or other mechanism that enable carbon pricing and enable good visibility on offsetting the footprint. So that's the essence of it, Michael. But I guess I'm very open to questions rather than just me speaking for 2 hours on this subject. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Frederick, for opening and setting the scene and sharing some of those thoughts. And we'll have a chance to dig a bit deeper and to revisit more topics. So thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to John T. Shepherd, who is Global Head of LNG Trading and Shipping, of course, with BP. Welcome, John T. Nice to see you again. Welcome to the panel. I think we've all been watching with great interest the articulation and development of a new strategy at BP under Bernard Looney. And I wondered if you could share with us how you think about decarbonisation of the LNG chain, and in particular, how that fits with your vision of net zero.
Very good. So thank you very much, Michael. Do we have the slides that we have prepared? So good. So whilst they come up, it's a great pleasure to be here speaking again virtually at the Methane conference. It's definitely one of my favourites of the year, and I think also great to be talking about such an important subject. So if we can move on to the first slide, please. Okay, so the next slide, thank you. So whilst the slide changes, the topic, I think, of the energy transition has become ever more relevant as we seek to build back better or build back greener. And with more and more announcements coming from both governments and the private sector to support this. And so indeed, as you mentioned, Michael, at BP, we recently hosted a 3-day virtual conference for all of our stakeholders to address our strategy for the future and why this represents such a huge business opportunity in our opinion, as well as being the right thing to do for the world. So we are pivoting at BP from being an international oil company to an international energy company. And as the slide says, our purpose is to reimagine energy for the people and the planet. Our ambition is to become a net zero company by 2050 or sooner. And we've identified 5 aims which we believe will help the world reach net zero. These include things such as growing as a leader in transparency, advocating in line with BP's ambition, and promoting cleaner cities. So can we move to the next slide, slide 3? So what does it mean for BP? We have 5 aims internally to support meeting our ambition of becoming a net zero company. As you can see from the slide, we're aiming to make absolute reductions in our operational emissions of 30 to 35% by 2030. We're intending to make 35 to 40% reductions in the Scope 3 emissions. Those are the emissions that are associated with our upstream oil and gas production and include all indirect emissions as well as those from using the products that are sold. This is the reduction which is equivalent to around 125 million tonnes annually. We also intend to be a third of the way towards our aim 3, which is to reduce overall carbon intensity of the products we sell by 50% by 2050. Aim 4, I think, is critical as well, which relates to methane. We're working with the Environmental Defence Fund and also Climate and Clean Air Coalition to improve the monitoring, measurement and reporting of the data of all our major oil and gas processing sites by 2023. And we'll use that data to confirm the baseline and then look for a 50% reduction in the intensity. So that gives you the context in terms of BP as a whole, but all of these actions are going to be critical if LNG is to play its fullest role in the energy transition. So at BP, we believe that LNG will do this both by replacing coal-fired generation and also as a backup fuel to enable renewables to provide steady, reliable power. We also believe that gas more generally combined with carbon capture and storage can provide a longer-term solution and also as a feedstock for blue hydrogen to facilitate the transition to a hydrogen economy. Can we move on to slide 4, please? So if we turn to the LNG value chain, it's clear that there are a number of sources of emissions from the upstream production through to the eventual use of the gas. And we are at BP looking at all aspects of that supply chain. I've already spoken about some of the key actions we're taking in the upstream to reduce emissions and to improve the monitoring and measurement of methane release in particular. But if we look at this value chain, we can see that the existing and new liquefaction are going to have different sources of gas and different efficiency in terms of their production processes. These are things that we need to take into account as BP and as an industry when we're looking at future investments. On the shipping side, we have already taken action to update our fleet with larger ships that have mega-fuel propulsion. These ships can reduce the emissions on a like-for-like basis compared to the older steam-class ships by up to 50%. Importantly, the engines have a very low methane slippage as well compared to competing technologies. For the end users, as I said, we're looking at carbon capture and storage, and together with our partners, we are developing the Teesside Net Zero project, where we're aiming to create a decarbonized industrial hub and produce zero carbon electricity. However, there remain many, many challenges, I think, for us as an industry. First is that there is currently limited data available to independently verify emissions at all stages of this life cycle. We at BP, as I have said, are committed to greater transparency of our operations and also to advocate for others to do the same. We are not yet united as an industry in our approach in this space. Secondly, not all locations will have suitable geology to store carbon. In this case at BP, we're also looking at opportunities to provide customers with natural climate solutions to offset the carbon. And of course, all of this comes at a cost, and we need to work with all the stakeholders in all parts of society to achieve the outcomes we're seeking. We believe a well-designed carbon price is an efficient way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It can provide the right incentive for producers and consumers to play their part. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jonty, for giving us that context in how you're thinking about the energy system and LNG in particular. We are now going to move to Mr. Atsunori Takeuchi-san, who is the Executive Officer and Senior General Manager of LNG Optimization and Trading Department with Tokyo Gas. Welcome, Takeuchi-san. I would like to hear, we welcome the chance to hear from you about the initiatives that Tokyo Gas is taking with respect to net zero CO2 and decarbonization of the LNG value chain.
Thank you, Mr. Stopper. I'm Atsunori Takeuchi from Tokyo Gas. I'm speaking from Japan, so Mount Fuji and flag of rising sun are proofs. And appreciated the opportunity to engage in discussion with you to solve issues surrounding the LNG industry. I'd like to make a brief presentation on our initiatives to achieve net zero CO2. Next slide, please. Next, please. Okay, thank you. Tokyo Gas is currently working hard to achieve a low carbon and decarbonized society as BP. We have a sense of crisis that we cannot survive without taking action and are aware of our mission as a utility company. In November last year, Tokyo Gas released Compass 2030 as its management vision targeting the year 2030. Our three new challenges are set forth in the vision. The first is to take a leading role to achieve net zero CO2 in anticipation of 2050 and beyond. As a city gas company, Tokyo Gas will utilize its technologies and experience relating to the effective use of natural gas towards net zero CO2 from both the supply and demand side. And the second challenge is to establish a value co-creation ecosystem with business partners, including companies in different industries and startup companies. And the third challenge is to transform the LNG value chain. In many regions, including Southeast Asia, energy demand is increasing as economies grow. These regions need to reduce CO2 emissions by introducing LNG in the near future. To contribute to emissions reductions on a global scale, we at Tokyo Gas are increasing our natural gas transaction volume to 20 million tons per annum. Meanwhile, we will expand our trading scale to 5 million tons. In September this year, Tokyo Gas has just established TG Global Trading. We expand our trading operation through this company by maximizing the use of our energy assets, such as storage tanks, vessels, and sales and purchase agreements. Next, please. And now I'd like to introduce measures to achieve net zero CO2 emissions from both the supply and the demand sides. On the demand side, Tokyo Gas is building a smart energy network nationwide. We can use electricity, heat, and renewable energy efficiently by utilizing technologies for effective use of natural gas, such as fuel cells and cogeneration. We can improve economic efficiency and resilience, as well as environmental friendliness. In another measure to achieve a hydrogen-based society from demand side, in 2008, Tokyo Gas launched the sales of the world's first residential fuel cells that use hydrogen extracted from city gas. On the supply side, CO2 emissions can be significantly reduced by expanding the use of natural gas-fired power, switching from coal. Tokyo Gas is now supplying carbon-neutral city gas using CO2 credit, which is imported as carbon-neutral LNG. The effect of CO2 reduction and absorption are certified as CO2 credit by the third-party verification organization. In addition, we introduced renewable energy in Japan and overseas, such as wind power and solar power in Mexico. Furthermore, to achieve future decarbonization, we'll pursue innovation in core technologies such as hydrogen production technologies and CCS technology, which combine the inspiration and recovery of CO2 emitted by customers. Next, please. Tokyo Gas recognized that decarbonization will be achieved only after thorough efforts to reduce our carbon footprint. Natural gas has the lowest environmental impact among all fossil fuels and excellent controllability. We strongly believe that the combination of natural gas and renewable energy is the most realistic solution to achieve a decarbonized society in the future. To reduce CO2 on a global scale, we will use energy effectively and introduce energy that doesn't emit CO2. We recover any CO2 emitted or offset it with reductions elsewhere. Through these efforts, looking ahead of 2050 and beyond, we will achieve net zero CO2 emission throughout all our business activities, including emission from the customers. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Takeuchi-san, and I look forward to hearing more on that, but that was very enlightening. Thank you very much indeed. We are going to turn to Jean-Francois Gauthier, who is Vice President, Sales and Marketing with GHGSat. Welcome, Jean-Francois. And I think what we'd like to hear from you is a little bit of understanding about how technology companies with satellite and other technologies, how you can contribute and support the industry in its decarbonization efforts. Jean-Francois.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this discussion. It's really an honor to be here with this esteemed panel. So I had slides as well that I had submitted. There you go. So as LNG continues to take on a leading role in the energy transition, there's also increasing scrutiny on its environmental impact as a result of potential leaks, for example. Without measurements, decarbonization is not really possible. So several technologies have emerged in the last few years to help with addressing this challenge. So today, I'll brief you briefly on and introduce you to one of these technologies. Next slide, please. GHGSat pioneered the monitoring of methane emissions directly at individual oil and gas sites with satellites in 2016 with our first satellite, Claire. A second satellite was just launched on September 2nd, and a third one is scheduled for launch in December of this year. And by the end of 2022, we expect to have a constellation of over 10 satellites. Now, with these new satellites, we already are expecting a 10 times improvement in performance over the performance of our first satellite, Claire. Each satellite takes imagery in 12 by 12 kilometer images, and this is done at 25-meter resolution. And the revisit time is about 2 weeks per satellite. So as we add more satellites to the constellation, we're then able to measure sites a lot more frequently. Next slide, please. So using satellites to monitor greenhouse gases isn't a new concept, but before 2016, it simply wasn't possible to look at emissions directly from individual sites. The high resolution is what makes it possible. So to better understand why high resolution is necessary, this table highlights the difference in performance between existing platforms like our satellites or TRPOMI from the European Space Agency and upcoming missions like Methane Sat from the Environmental Defense Fund and GeoCarb. So the difference in resolution is obvious, with GHGSat over 100 times better than any other system, with resolutions in tens of meters compared to kilometers for other missions. Again, this is absolutely critical for reliable identification and measurement of emissions directly from sites. However, there's a few other key advantages. Please click once to advance the slide. Thank you. The high resolution allows for measurements to be made in partly cloudy conditions, providing the ability to see between clouds. TRPOMI data availability, in contrast, has been around 9% historically, in part because the presence of clouds in any part of a pixel that's 7 by 7 kilometers makes that pixel useless. So in contrast, GHGSat measurements are made at 25 meter resolution, which has resulted in a 57% success rate over the last 4 years. One more click, please. More importantly, the detection threshold of GHGSat satellite is up to 100 times better than publicly available data. So this means that not only can emissions be attributed directly to individual sites, but emissions from sources that are 100 times smaller than those that can be seen with public data can be identified. Next slide, please. So to illustrate what these kinds of measurements provide in terms of information and insight, I've included 2 examples here of measurements that were made around the world. So on your left, you see an example of a measurement that was made in the Urangor region of Russia. This is at a processing facility, at a midstream facility there, and you can clearly see the plume emanating from that. From a part of that facility, so it's easy to identify exactly where the plume is coming from. On the right, this is an example of a site in the Permian in Texas, and you can see a tank battery with several tanks. So of course we can't identify which tank is responsible, but we're able to identify that this particular site is responsible for this plume, making it a lot easier for operators to deploy resources as there are hundreds of other facilities in the nearby vicinity. Next slide. So how does this look for LNG facilities around the world? So these facilities are typically larger than regular upstream facilities, but the technology is still ideally suited to keep an eye on these, like terminals, processing plants, and storage facilities, frequently and affordably. So this particular picture here on your left shows a single GHGSat image, a 12 by 12 kilometer image highlighted by the red square. And you can see 3 LNG terminals in Australia that most of you will be very familiar with. So we're able to image these 3 terminals at the same time in one image. Next click, please. However, to illustrate just how the resolution can help zero in on which part of the facility is responsible for the emissions, you can see here a 25 meter by 25 meter grid over a typical LNG facility. And really, while we're not able to identify which flange or valve is responsible, we can clearly direct personnel to a specific area of the site, helping the better utilization of resources around the site. Next slide. Thank you very much for your attention. I really look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Francois, for giving us that introduction or high-level view of where satellite technology is, and congratulations on getting your second satellite launched. We will move now to George Gilboy, who is Chief Representative in Japan for Woodside Energy. Nice to see you, George. Welcome. And I think we'd like to hear from you. I know that Woodside has been active looking at hydrogen and possibly ammonia. I wonder what you can share with us about some of your thinking in that space with regard to synergies of hydrogen and LNG. Thank you, George.
Thanks very much, Michael. And thank you to Mehdi for the opportunity to be with all of you here today. Well, look, the synergies really are significant. In our view, LNG capabilities can help establish new low carbon fuels such as hydrogen and ammonia. Ammonia itself could be a hydrogen carrier molecule, and of course, it can also be a fuel. And therefore, LNG can help launch a transition to net zero emissions fuels. How does that story play out? In the near term, we expect blue hydrogen, that is hydrogen manufactured from natural gas and with the carbon emissions from that process offset, to be the means of developing a market and underpinning the infrastructure that will be required. Now, starting a market and reaching commercial scale soon are really essential for making hydrogen and ammonia fuels affordable and for making a material contribution to decarbonization. So to get a market started, cost and affordability certainly will be a key consideration. Blue ammonia or hydrogen is 1/3 the cost of green, and that cost gap really may persist for many years, even as the cost of renewables continues to decline. In the longer term, we expect green hydrogen, that's hydrogen manufactured completely carbon-free from electrolysis of water using renewable energy, to be a major export opportunity for Australia and Woodside due to the renewable energy resources within Australia and our expertise and experience in gas. Now, in addition to the use of gas in blue hydrogen and ammonia, there are specific synergies between LNG-related capabilities and hydrogen and ammonia, and those include the large-scale production of a material that requires safe handling and reliable operation, the long-distance transport of a cold material, the management of emissions at the source, which could be an advantage versus trying to manage emissions at the point of use. For these hydrogen projects, again, to be at commercial scale, which is the key to affordability and material impact, we're going to need large investments, large capital investments, and therefore the players in the industry need to have strong financial capabilities and stability. If we look at the liquefaction process, perhaps for hydrogen, that's going to be somewhat similar to the LNG process, and Woodside and other LNG industry players are in a good position to help see that technology get up to scale to reduce cost and improve efficiency. Now, on the softer side, there are other very important capabilities. Perhaps they'll be as important or even more important in getting a market really going. In the LNG industry, we have excellent long-term partnerships and well-known operational and contractual common practices with large-scale utilities. And that's very important because large-scale use of ammonia and hydrogen ultimately in power generation is really going to be the key to lowering cost of these fuels and making a material contribution to decarbonization. So let me wrap up with just a couple of comments about specific Woodside activities in hydrogen and also in ammonia. We're currently working on a project looking at the feasibility for export of blue ammonia as a fuel to be used by the coal industry, the coal power industry in Japan. We're working with JERA, Marubeni, and IHI on that, and that project is being supported by the Japan New Energy and Industrial Technology Development Organization, NEDO. We have some other technology initiatives going on with Japanese firms, and these are exploring the potential for liquid hydrogen and also liquid organic hydrogen carriers. These other technologies, one of the prominent ones is MCH, also for transporting hydrogen. We have some domestic hydrogen demonstration projects in Tasmania and in Western Australia, and the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, ARENA, has shortlisted Woodside as one of the project developers for a 10-megawatt domestic hydrogen pilot demonstration facility. And in South Korea, we're partnering with South Korean firms to establish downstream hydrogen fueling stations vehicles. So I really think that the synergies are significant there, and in a lot of ways, you can think of LNG as kind of the launching pad for hydrogen and ammonia, and ultimately for these net zero carbon fuels. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, George, for giving us that view of the future, and perhaps not so far in the future either. I mean, things happening now. So thank you for looking at those new developing technologies. Our final panelist on this session, I'd like to welcome Mr. Lucian Pugliaresi, the president of EPRINC. Now, Lucian, I understand that you were co-moderating the LNG workshop on, I think it was on the 17th of September. So we look forward to a high-level reporting back on that. And I think in particular, if you can share with us some innovations that are going on in universities and how you see the collaboration between industry, government, and universities. I think that was part of what you discussed. Lucian.
Right, absolutely. So let's pull up the slides, please. One of the things we want to talk a little bit about is decarbonization through the LNG value chain and the potential going forward here. Next slide. So IEEJ, who you all know well, and EPRINC has had a 4-year program looking at the assessment on the future of Asian LNG. And this program historically has been accompanied by workshops in Tokyo, Washington, and many countries throughout Southeast Asia. This year, of course, we went to a virtual format. The program supports the efforts of the Japan-US Strategic Energy Partnership, and really it's directed at expanding LNG markets throughout Asia as a way to move down the curve, shall we say, on carbon emission. Generally, we publish this research, and we will continue to publish this research on each of our websites. Next slide, please. I do think that one of the interesting presentations was by the NETL, the National Energy Technical Laboratory at DOE, and it gave us a picture of what happens to the whole value chain, what happens to your carbon emissions when you look at the whole value chain. And you can see here in shipments from New Orleans to Shanghai, or from Darwin, Australia to Osaka, Japan, there's, if you evaluate the carbon emissions across the whole chain, it's very efficient relative to some other distances. There's more that could be done, particularly versus coal in the Chinese markets, and even shipments from Yamal. And this particular research is available and up on the DOE website, and it will be on our respective websites. Next slide. So first, I think in the short period of time we have here, we can't really go into great detail, but I was very impressed by the research at the University of California, LBL, and ExxonMobil on new techniques that are using highly porous material to expand carbon capture at very low cost. This is a research by Jeffrey Long. I really encourage you to look at this. JGC provided some excellent presentations on how they're advancing carbon recycling solution. Of course, we have the CEO-led initiative by the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, and it's an impressive commitment of collective strategies for research and develop to advance and deploy lower carbon emission technologies. And then we also saw some important advances taking place in Japan's hydrogen strategy. There's been some interesting progress by Kawasaki Heavy Industries with their liquefaction plant for hydrogen export to Japan from Australia. And of course, MHI's development of a hydrogen liquefaction carrier. All of these were quite interesting. Next slide, please. So I think, in sort of summary, I'd like to say there's a large array of opportunities to accelerate decarbonization across the whole natural gas value chain. And we've heard some of those already, certified net zero LNG through offsets, improve operations of pipelines and LNG carriers, and of course, carbon capture at both the production at both the production and the combustion site. And as we've already learned today, hydrogen and natural gas offers considerable potential to deliver carbon-free energy and emission trading. So we have to use the whole array of options and incentive systems that are open to us. But one issue that I think we need to put a lot more attention to is the fact that if we were to reduce all OECD emissions to zero today, we would only take us back to the total world emissions of 1995. And as we get out of the post-COVID era, budgets are going to be constrained and priorities are going to be reorganized. And I think for the industry, this is an enormous challenge because costly alternatives are not going to be easily adopted. So the key to the future to this is continued innovation and continued R&D to get these costs down and operational and effective. So I will leave it with that.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucien, and that completes the opening remarks. Thank you to all 6 of you. I'm going to jump straight into questions, and I'm first of all going to direct them very specifically to panelists. I'd like to go back to Jean-Francois Gaultier. It was fascinating to get that landscape of where things stand on satellite technology. I wonder if you could add more about how you think about and how you're operating with members of the industry. If you can talk more about your partnership there.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Yes, so collaboration with industry is a core value for us at GHGSat. We've chosen to work directly with industry, not against it, and we think that's where the most value resides. So you'll never see us pointing fingers at certain companies, highlighting emissions from an operator, for example. We prefer to work directly with operators and with the industry to help them better understand their emissions and ultimately address them. So as an illustration of this, Lucien mentioned OGCI. Well, we've been an OGCI company since 2018, and this has really helped to forge relationships with some of the bigger players in the industry, and also start talking with the right individuals within these companies. So collaboration is really central to our beliefs.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Let's move to back to Frederick Barneau. I'm interested to hear from you, Frederick, on thoughts you may have about collaborate, this theme that Lucien alluded to about collaboration between governments and industry and other stakeholders. How do you see that?
I see that as an immense task. Essentially, the wide range of stakeholders has multiplied as we tackle those issues. So we are not used to it. And therefore, we need to reinforce or set up proper partnership and deep relationship, because there won't be, or there might, but not many grand schemes, grand discovery or technological advance. So it's a constellation of small progress that will make, but determination that will make us move forward. For example, I think better leadership at the political level is needed. That's pragmatic, not dogmatic. Better interactions, even with ministries in one single country. You have different views across the civil services. And then with the universities, but also the operators, and we've seen BP, Shell, and Total being quite pushy on that one. But again, more of that is needed with true leadership so that it is somehow organized. But one point is the past few months have probably taught us that it's not just about short-term profits. It's about having a longer-term vision of the impact for the economics and some of the benefits of having a deep decarbonization strategy. So that must be integrated, and I'm totally against just reasoning about short-term profits or costs. For example, when we talk about carbon neutral energy outputs. And that must be also facilitated, as Jean said, with a better pricing and visibility for carbon. and better market-based mechanism, because not many people care when the carbon price or tax is like $1 or $2 or $3 per ton. Or when it's reached 30 euro per ton, you start to look at things differently. And then if it's market-based, probably less dogmatism in the mechanism. So that requires supranational coordination. That probably should be led by G20 countries and expanded across not just the political concerns, but cooperations with the stakeholders, such as the companies, the buyers like us, and that's for the benefit of all. But it's not an easy task to do that. Pragmatic step, but determination.
Certainly, it won't be easy and complicated, but very important message that we keep our sights on the vision at this time of crisis. Thank you very much. Takeuchi-san, I'd like to hear from you, if we may, more about your thinking or your intention behind that carbon neutral LNG that you've been talking about. Can you add some information there? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. It's a good question, and let me try to answer. Tokyo Gas purchases carbon neutral LNG from Shell and supplies it to customers as carbon neutral city gas. Environmental projects around the world enable nature to reduce or absorb CO2 emissions from the atmosphere. These effects are certified as CO2 credits by a highly reliable third-party verification organization. Carbon credits are used to offset all CO2 emissions generated throughout the process, from exploring and producing natural gas to its use by the final consumers. For us, the suppliers, it can be utilized as a product for developing new business and to develop a customer base with a key interest and environmental value. So for customers, the advantage is that the environmental value of using carbon neutral city gas can be employed to appeal to investors and other stakeholders. However, at this time, these credits cannot be counted as CO2 emission reduction volume in Japanese domestic scheme. Mitigation of climate change requires measures to be taken on a global scale. The effects of carbon credit initiatives undertaken only in LNG consuming countries are limited. In the future, it will be necessary to implement decarbonization measures that also include gas producing countries and consuming countries where demand is increasing. It's important to strengthen the price competitiveness of LNG, including the credits. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you very clearly. And your presentation already drew an important distinction between the zero part of the chain and the net zero, and the importance of offset. So thank you for sharing more on that, which is clearly a business that we're going to see grow. I'm going to swing back to George Gilboy of Woodside Energy. George, you placed a lot, I mean, obviously your opening remarks were very much focused on technology. And I'm interested in your thoughts also on another area of technology, artificial intelligence and big data. How is Woodside Energy making use of that to improve operations? Any thoughts there?
Well, this is a really exciting opportunity for Woodside and for the industry as a whole. Our industry, through our operations, is really data rich. We generate lots of data, but it's really only been in recent years that producers have been thinking about how can we understand that data and try to use it. At Woodside, we've really built up over a period of several years now, our in-house capabilities in artificial intelligence, in machine learning, and in robotics. And we think that these technologies can really help us provide real-time insights. They can enable better decision-making, and they can enable cost reductions, higher reliability at the facilities. And for our people, these technologies can help reduce exposure to safety risks. So together with robotics and with autonomous systems capabilities, the technologies in big data, and artificial intelligence can give us the ability to detect and to respond to emerging issues that might be happening in our facilities before they disrupt operations. In some way, this is the predictive maintenance story. But also, these capabilities can make a contribution to emissions management. And so, for example, our robotics team are now conducting trials of robotic surveillance platforms that capture information about the plants, and they use gas sensors. They're using forward-looking infrared sensors. But rather than being fixed-in-place type sensors, these are on a permanent walk-around basis to give us lots of flexibility and coverage. Our plants also operate the IBM Watson for Safety cognitive platform, and this overlays known information about minor gas leaks, planned maintenance, plant operation, and that helps us to track and prioritize maintenance. And we're also operating a maximum possible production system at the Pluto LNG plant. This helps us with multi-factor process optimization, and that helps us to maximize production efficiency at the plant. So together, these technologies help to improve reliability and improve efficiency, and that in turn can help to reduce emissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, at this point in the panel, I'd like to ask some open questions to a number of you. And I think the key question really is, to what extent you see this movement towards decarbonization compatible or not compatible with growth, a question that's particularly relevant to oil and gas companies. I think I'll turn to John T. Shepherd to take that question first. How do you see the growth of LNG within your business?
So I think we talked about this at the start. I think this is a huge business opportunity. We're going to see a massive shift in society, which is going to require huge investment from a whole range of different companies if we're going to be successful. So I think the first thing is that, I mean, wherever there is this sort of investment opportunity there, I mean, there is good business to be done. I think from a BP perspective, as we said, we're committed to being a net zero company. We're committed to reducing the emissions from our operations, and we are seeking to do that in all parts of the value chain. As we move forwards, we also believe that LNG is going to be a key part of the energy transition. So we continue to look to build our portfolio, and we announce that we will seek to build it up to 30 million tons plus by 2030. So I think, you know, LNG is I think has part of the solution to play. At the same time, we need to make sure that we do come up with ways of reducing the emissions in that value chain, and solutions for reducing the carbon impact more generally.
Thank you very much. George, maybe you have another comment there.
Well, yeah, I think one thing that we sometimes neglect to talk about because we are talking so much about the future, and of course that's good, is that gas and LNG are already playing a very large role in decarbonization in the world energy system by displacing higher carbon fuels. So if you look at what the IEA thinks, the International Energy Agency, since 2010, the coal to gas switching has avoided around 500 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions. And so that's a really material contribution. If you wanted to get a similar level of contribution, you'd have to have 200 million zero carbon vehicles displace the equivalent fossil fuel vehicles. And today, the world fleet for such vehicles is only 5 million. So I think there's certainly real contribution that LNG can make, and I certainly agree with what John T. just said about how LNG can be a partner with renewables and help actually renewables grow. In another setting, I've called this LNG and natural gas cleaner than coal and better than batteries. And the better than batteries part we don't have time for, but just to say that for some applications, gas and a dispatchable power generation source are superior to batteries, and may be so for a long time. So we're partners there.
You know, Michael, I think one of the things we have to be realistic about is some landmines are out there. The first, we had a session today with the California Public Utilities Commission. And there was clear there that said, look, okay, it's good for us to reduce these emissions. We're spending a lot of money on it, but we need to put more budget into adaptation. And so, because California itself cannot affect the world climate that substantially, it can provide a great demonstration effect. The other issue is with LNG and hydrogen, particularly when you go to the developing world and the non-OECD world throughout Asia, we have to make a strong case. Look, this will work for you. It's not a rich man's fuel, and so the emphasis needs to be on R&D, getting the cost down, because in the absence of that, we're going to get a lot of resistance outside the OECD. And so I think that's a real challenge for the industry and something we're going to have to take on.
Thank you very much. I'd like to bring in Takeuchi-san and your thoughts about decarbonization and growth, and maybe particularly, I don't know if you have comments on decarbonization of the heat sector.
Now we are marketing carbon neutral LNG as a city, as I mentioned, to some executive companies, which is very interested in environmental issues, or some big companies. So, but I don't know this carbonization interest spread all over Japan or non-OECD countries, as Mr. Lucian mentioned. So I think it's very difficult to think about globally, but we have to consider its movement of carbon neutral LNG. Oh, this is my opinion.
Thank you very much. And go to Frederick, yes.
I think the opportunity is huge by replacing coal by natural gas and LNG. We have to acknowledge, though, that natural gas remains a fossil fuel. So as long as we don't do that, we are still sinners. So it's compounding deep technology improvement for either improving on cost, but also on decarbonization of the production chain, but also complement that and reinforce the attractivity of natural gas through those carbon neutral strategies in the short and medium term. So it's really a combination of both that's really important. But the price is there. Is without those efforts on solutions of decarbonization, carbon neutral LNG, then the market will remain as it is. It will grow, but not as much as its potential, which is to fully displace coal and to fully displace oil in some of the transportation segments. So that's the real price, but I truly believe that we need to acknowledge somehow that we have a lot of efforts to make and not just talk about price or about availability of gas or etc. It's recognizing its footprint is a first step towards improving its image.
Oh, very good, thank you. Just before we close up with the key words, I don't know if anyone else wanted to come in and comment at this stage. Jean-Francois, we lost you at the very end of your comments, but we did capture clearly your message that this is about collaboration between technology and industry. That point came through loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, that was a very timely network malfunction. I'm glad the message came across.
I am, yes. Thank you very much, Michael. I think just following up on what Frederic said, I think we need to recognize the importance of getting markets to work, both in terms of reducing the cost of LNG compared to competing fuels, but also I think in terms of pricing carbon. We've seen in Europe where a minimum carbon price in the UK and also a higher carbon price recently in Europe has led to significant reductions in the amount of coal generation and gas replacing it. So I think it requires governments, it requires consumers, and it requires producers to all work together if we're going to do that. And again, as Frederic and I think Jean-Francois said, getting the right measurements and standardization of the measurement processes in place is going to be really key as well. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you to you. Thank you to you all. We come to the end of the session, and in order to finish, we've set this challenge to each of you to write down on a piece of paper or on a flip chart a few keywords to summarize the takeaways for our audience. Now, I wonder who'd like to go first. Maybe George?
Sure. If we were talking earlier about the role of LNG and synergies with future fuels, hydrogen and ammonia, I think my message would be is blue is the key to unlocking the long-term green. So blue to green.
Blue to
Can that be seen?
We can see very clearly. Yes, thank you. Excellent. John T.
So for me, I think it's all about the collaboration and the need to start working now and stop talking. So I've written down here, we all need to work together now, underlining all and now. Is that better? There we go. Can you see it? I think you're muted, Michael.
My turn to be muted, yes. Can see it as you lifted it. Thank you. Takeuchi-san.
Okay. Can you see?
We can see. Net zero CO2 from both supply and demand side.
Yeah, as I explained, we believe that it's important to make efforts from both supply and demand side to achieve net zero CO2. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, I picked up from your earlier comments the importance of thinking about both the supply and the demand side. So thank you for that. Frederick.
I think I would underline partnership, decarbonization strategies, and as well as pricing of carbon as critical in this instance.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Yes, we can see. Thank you. Very good. Jean-Francois.
All right, let's see if I can. All right, here we go. So, so I have accurate measurement, obviously, to establish a baseline, but also quantify the progress made towards decarbonization. Then I have collaboration, and collaboration means a lot of things here in this discussion. I believe collaboration within the industry. Collaboration between technologies, because there's no single solution. It really is a group effort. And finally, affordability. And again, this means a few things, I believe, in this context. In my direct context, affordability of measurements, because without the ability to measure affordably, then nobody will want to actually go through that. But also affordability of the LNG industry in general, so that it remains attractive and competitive.
Thank you very much. And I think, Lucian, you have the final word here.
So I think R&D, if we don't get the technology more efficient, less costly, we're not going to get the non-OECD world to buy in.
Well, thank you very much. My concluding thoughts on the panel are, I mean, I'm more used to discussing, as I think many of us are on the call, the markets. And so it's really been fascinating to me to focus more on the technology, the R&D, the collaboration into universities. I think as the industry puts alongside these sustainability metrics, alongside the financial metrics, this is clearly going to be a growth area. And I'm just frankly quite stunned to think about some of the technologies that we are talking about and the status compared to the type of discussions that we were having 2 or 3 years ago. And in particular, you know, the emergence of detection and measurement as a critical element as we go forward. So I'm sure the audience virtually is thanking you all for sharing so generously your experience and your company's activities. And I'd like also to express my thanks to you for joining us at this conference. Goodbye now. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
With this, we concluded all the sessions for today. Before concluding, we would like to have a closing remark by Mr. Minami Ryo, Director General Oil and Gas and Mineral Resource Agency for Natural Resource and Energy, METI.
Director General of Oil and Gas Department of METI. I would like to express our sincere gratitude for joining us until the end. Today, we received powerful messages from global leaders in LNG policy and business. And in our panel discussion, we were able to address core issues. I would like to close the meeting by summarizing today's discussion. This is the 9th meeting since the start in 2012. 2012 was in the midst of a paradigm shift with the advent of shale gas. The LNG producer and consumer conference was established with the aim of bringing together the cooperation of related parties into one great force. And through the effort of everyone for the past 8 years, the LNG market has expanded and has grown into a more reliable energy source. However, today, again, a major paradigm shift is now coming to LNG due to climate change issues and the impact of COVID-19. And I have confirmed the challenge we must take in order for LNG to continue to be a valuable energy. I strongly feel that in the future, I need to work with you on the following 2 points. First, an initiative for decarbonization to make clean LNG cleaner. We will promote decarbonization of the entire LNG value chain. Furthermore, towards 2050, we will take on the challenge of producing hydrogen and ammonia from LNG by utilizing carbon recycling and CCS. In order to materialize this innovation, we will work hand in hand with the countries and industry. Second point is to expand a more flexible and transparent LNG market. Today, Minister Kajiyama made a clear statement that Japan will continue to contribute to the expansion and flexibility of the LNG market. We will continue to discuss diversification of price indicators, relaxation of destination restrictions, and flexibility of price review clauses. Prompt action is important for the expansion of the Asian LNG market. Moreover, it will support Japan achieve its goal of 100 million tons of LNG handling volume. As mentioned by the Minister, in order to strongly promote these two initiatives, we will review the 2016 LNG market strategy and create a new one. Japan needs support from all of you here. This year, this conference was under COVID-19. The LNG market is currently uncertain. Thus, I keenly felt the need for strong cooperation between gas-producing and consuming countries. Through today's meeting, I am confident that we were able to share with you the specific directions of actions that each country and interior should take. We would like to thank everyone who has been with us until the end. I hope we will meet face-to-face next year in Japan. Thank you very much.